Wishing you all a super warm welcome to Connecting with Purpose, where we connect with winners and thought leaders from multiple sectors to provide you with a 360-degree view on purpose. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. Our purpose, to inspire you to unlock your potential and optimize your performance and impact. Well, welcome everybody to episode 8 of Connecting with Purpose, and today I'm really excited to be joined by J.P. O'Brien, somebody I've only known for probably 4 or 5 months, who is the founder and CEO of Black Lab Sports and also Biosciences. And J.P. is just one of these inspirational entrepreneurs, connectors, and investors that's fully driven by purpose. So couldn't really be a better guest to welcome to episode 8. So JP, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Mark.
Absolutely. Well, if you've seen any of our prior episodes, you'll know that we don't sort of ask everyone to talk us through their career and bio. As impressive as it is for you, what I'd like to do instead is have you think back on your experiences, on your career, and pick out what we call magic moments. So probably pick out 3, if you can, magic moments. Magic moments we would define as kind of, defining moments, so defining experiences. If you were going to give them a score, you give them a 10 out of 10 as an experience as you look back on it, because it was pivotal for whatever reason, in your career or your personal professional life. So the challenge is 3 magic moments. What was it about them that made it magic? And if you had to give each of them a name, what would you call them?
Okay. So when I thought about this, when I watched a couple of the other episodes, I decided to take my own stint on it, which is I'm going to only talk about the past decade. Because I think for me, I'm always looking at, you have to have at least 3 magic moments each decade. And I could talk about when I was a kid, but I'm going to just focus on the last decade. And the first one is about 8 years ago. And what happened was I really went down this, what I call core purpose search. And so it will be kind of a key topic for our conversation today. But as life does, it provided me an opportunity to think about what was going to be part 2 of my life. I had done a bunch of startups. I'd done an investment bank. I did amazing things. And I had a family growing and all this stuff. But I really was kind of struck with this aha moment about wait, what am I really doing and what is my purpose? And for me, what I did was I started reading a ton about all these amazing people who had changed kind of the trajectory of humanity and our existence. Artists like Da Vinci and, scientists like Feynman and Einstein and, people that, in the Great American Explosion, like, Carnegie and whatnot. And so what was it about them that made them so not just special, but made them really create this step function change in humanity? And so for me anyway, when I went down that path, I found my purpose, which I know we'll talk about later, but just to highlight it here is to unleash the greatness in the people around me. And with that, it was an absolute 10 out of 10 moment. And I'd call it finding purpose, that ever since I've never looked back. Every morning, I know that's my purpose. That's what I get up to do. My relationships, the work I do is all centered around that moment. So that's number 1.
Brilliant.
Number 2, I'm a kind of a lifelong learner. And so, and sometimes I'm really slow, actually. The second one is about me finally not being so stubborn, but asking my brother, his name is Jude Sky, and he's a teacher and a healer. He actually teaches in the Lakota tradition. And he'd been talking to me about mindfulness and meditation for years, for decades. And I was on this high tech path and exponential technologies. And it wasn't until I found my purpose that I said, wait a minute, maybe I should learn about this meditation thing. And so I actually, kind of humbly went to him and said, hey, Jude, can you teach me about this meditation thing? And he brought me in and sat me down and taught me how to do my very first meditation. And since then, that was about the same time, about 7 years ago now, maybe 6.5 years ago, that has changed what I think of consciousness and reality, and all the different learnings that's come through it since then has been amazing. So that's number 2, is learning to meditate. And the third one was about 3 years ago. And this was another life-giving an opportunity. I found this bump on my hip, and I was like, "Wow, that's gross. Is that like a pimple or something?" I'm in the shower trying to get rid of it, and it's not going anywhere. So I go to the doctor. I'm having a physical, and I say, "Can you get rid of that?" And so he does the same thing, tries to pop it, and he's like, "Just go to the dermatologist, get it cut out. It's kind of right on the belt line." So I go to the dermatologist. Long story short, it ends up being a hydradenocarcinoma, which is a super rare form of cancer. It's a tumor in my sweat gland. And he cuts it out. He doesn't know at first. He's like, it's fine, nothing. And then he calls me back 2 weeks later. You've got to get in here. That was a cancer tumor, and we don't have clean margins. And so sent me down this amazing path of cancer, and not just cancer, but research. And being a learner, I wanted to learn all about this. Really, as my wife says, JP, you can't do anything kind of generic. You always have to go the unique way. This was a very rare thing. And by the way, don't look it up on Google, because it'll tell you that 70% of the people that have this are dead in 3 years. Mostly because it's so rare and it looks like a pimple and on the back of your neck or something, and you don't take care of it, and next thing you know, metastasizes. Anyway, the thing that set me off about that was, and this one I would say it's about nutrition and what we eat. I've learned since then, 95% of all epigenetic expression in your body is driven about your environment. And that's number one, about your food and your nutrition, your environment, how you sleep, environment, what you think, environment, who you surround yourself with, your environment, and what you breathe. And these things are so important, and yet we do not, in our society, focus on them. We focus on, big food and big pharma in ways that increase revenues and profits. And I think to me, the kind of the highlight, and that's actually why we started Biosciences, was, wait a minute, we can actually we can change the dialogue, but really understanding what's personalized for us and how to change what we eat and how we basically integrate with the environment around us. So those are the three things.
Awesome. Wow. I've got to put you right up there on a 10 out of 10 for guests in terms of picking three incredibly relevant magic moments, and that's just from this decade. So we could have a whole podcast, I'm sure, on all the others. But just picking up on the last one, because that's opening a world up to you of potentially fear, but opportunity and learning and everything else that ultimately resulted in you founding Biosciences. So and I'd like to talk about Black Dog as well, but just talk us through how you go from realizing you've got a tumor to actually founding a company to change this dialogue, and what are you doing at Biosciences off the back of that experience that you've had, essentially, to try and change the style of other people?
Yeah. Well, so the foundation of Black Lab is about working on hard problems, hard and messy problems, and using first principles thinking to really think about the problem itself. So not the symptom. So a classic scenario would be, for example, hey, I have psoriasis. I've got a skin condition. Well, today's pharma, we put a lotion on that to try to take care of it. Meanwhile, the truth is that psoriasis actually gets generated from gut inflammation. So we have to fix the gut if we want to get rid of psoriasis. And so instead of trying to address the symptom, we're trying to address the problem. So going into the cancer piece, Dr. Robinson's awesome group down there said, hey, you should try different things. We're not sure. Is it chemo? Is it radiation? What should we do? And I said, well, before we do that, can we ask the basic problems? Why is it there? And he said, listen, this is really rare. We don't know. I was okay. Well, why now? He said, again, you probably bumped your hip when you were a kid. It's just starting to flag now, and it's starting to grow. It's okay, well, why is it growing? And he said, well, it's because you're feeding it. I said, well, let's stop there. I want to stop feeding it then. How do we do that? He's like, well, it's probably what you're eating. Okay. Well, why didn't we start there? And so that's kind of how we think about things. And so when I started digging more into it, I took all my blood, I got my labs done, I did all my DNA and my genomics and epigenetics to see what was expressing. And I found out that for me, my diet, which hadn't changed, I was born in France, so I like my croissants and my butter, but simple carbohydrates were spiking my glucose. And that was the fuel, that was the sugar that was fueling this tumor. So I just had to change my diet and eliminate those simple carbohydrates. I lost a ton of weight. I got in really good shape. The tumor's gone. And so all these things happened because of that. And that triggered this aha moment, wait a minute. I personally went through this scenario. How many other people are going through this scenario, right? Whether it's, diabetes or surgery or, trying to perform optimally, not sleeping well at night, having psoriasis, depression. Did you know, our serotonin is built to, again, generated in our gut. So if we have an unhealthy gut, we can't actually have that happy juice. So these are the things that I had no idea about. 3 years ago, I had no idea. And so once we kind of pop into a problem set, kind of acute problem, we understand the basis of these first principles, then the question is, well, what could we do to solve that root problem? And for us, it was about building a company that can diagnose using labs and other things like genetics and epigenetics. Actually can use science in the literature that's already been done to come up with the recommendations of what you should do, and then be able to actually create the supply chain to manufacture and deliver these solutions for the individual. And so that's what we built.
Why is it, do you think, that there's not more mainstream approaches like that are really looking at first principles and getting to the core of the problem and providing direct solutions on it, rather than essentially just, as you said, they're either addressing a symptom or essentially it's kind of like helping you feel a little bit better, but actually not preventing the problem in the first place? Why isn't there more just root kind of prevention companies out there? Why is that not mainstream, do you think?
Well, I think there's two things going on here. One is that we have amazing, inventors out there, and forever, like it's the Post-it note example, right? Hey, we created this glue, but now so we have a solution. This glue sticks but doesn't stick. What are we going to do with it? And so then they look for the problem, and that's kind of been taught. So Plato and even Viagra, all these things were built on a completely different idea. And then it didn't work for that idea, and so then they're trying to find a solution. So that is something that's happened mainstream. That's probably generally pretty new to science. The second thing, I don't think I think most scientists really like the scientific process and thinking about the problem first. I don't think but I'm not sure business rewards that, right? So, if you I'll just use the food example. The top 25 food producers in the U.S., something like 80%, I think it's even more, 84% of the foods that they manufacture are considered to be 100% basically have no nutritional value. So why would they produce those things, that are sugar and salt? Because they want to sell more of it that people will eat, right? So it's this revenue-driven concept versus this human potential and human optimization. Again, I'm not trying to villainize anybody. Those individuals are trying to do great things. It's just, I think, what we've kind of fallen into.
Well, and I suppose the reality is, if the revenue's there, the demand's there. If the demand's there, that's the culture of that society that's going to buy that stuff, because that's what they're used to buying. That's what other people buy. That's the norm. And so I suppose a lot of these types of things ultimately come down to changing culture. And I suppose the cultures that you are involved with, right, whether it's, through Black Lab or Me Biosciences, the companies that you invest in would have very much purpose-driven cultures, very intentional cultures that are aimed to achieve a specific type of impact. And it's all around human potential. So what are, in your opinion, what are some of the things that are just fundamental best practices, or if you like, core drivers of human potential, if you had to summarize those for the broader audience?
Well, when we look at human potential, it's a couple of things. One, it's kind of easily to say it's about mind, body, heart, spirit. Like, so how do you individually understand about up-leveling that? So it doesn't mean everyone needs to get to a certain level or a certain distance or jump a certain height or lift a certain weight or read a certain speed. It means for yourself, are you at a place, or do you want to learn and grow? So it's this growth mindset. From our perspective, from an investment perspective, we're looking very specifically at a couple core themes. One is vitality. So this is around the kind of optimization of health, living as long as you can, as healthy as you can. It's around consciousness. So again, up-leveling our ability to understand what consciousness is and being not just for ourselves, but for our communities, our families, our societies, and hopefully the globe. And then it's things like community and environment, where how we actually interact with the system. And I think so. That's how we think about it today, and it's going to evolve. Like, for example, we just saw William Shatner go to the first time he finally went out of space today, and he came back, and the first thing he says, everyone has to do this. Well, if everyone has to do this, then everyone's going to space, right? To be able to experience this new consciousness. Well, is that the next level of optimization? So this will change forever as a species.
What are some of the connections? If everything's a system, if everyone's connected, everything's connected, what do you think are some of the core connections between vitality, consciousness, community, and the environment? Like, do you ever look at all four of those things together holistically, or are you in particular companies just focusing on one thing? Because at the end of the day, that one thing's still connected to the other. So how do you see those things kind of connecting together? And are there companies or individuals that you work with where they have a really holistic approach to tackling all four of those things?
Yeah, it's all connected. And I think there's two different ways. You can be super focused on a certain area, but understand how you connect to the system, or you can try to offer those platforms. So it's 100% connected. When I think about, from a thesis perspective, it always starts with know thyself, right? As simple as that is, right? Go back to Aristotle. Yeah. But how do you really know yourself? And so imagine a person who's kind of blind to the world, right? They're doing their thing. Maybe their name is J.P. Maybe they're 45 and they've been pretty good at starting companies and raising a family, and he thinks he's in charge of his life. But meanwhile, he's just been kind of doing the things that kind of showed up in front of him. Mm-hmm. Not almost a little asleep, right? Just kind of gets up and does his thing and goes to sleep and gets up and does his thing. And so all of a sudden he's kind of on this treadmill. And I think it starts in all these situations with, can you get the individual to actually start to wake up to whatever that next level of and say, wait a minute, there's something else here. And we always start with purpose. And so the dialogue has always been around, what's your purpose? And a lot of people, 80% of people say, that's a good question. I've never thought about that. 18% of people say, I'm actually kind of in that dialogue with myself right now, working on it. And then 2% of people say, it's this. And for us, that's kind of a great launching off place for anybody, regardless of where you are in that system.
Well, yeah, definitely preaching to the converted here, because I think I could tie most things to purpose. And if someone was going to ask me that question, where I haven't got anywhere near the amount of information you've got on those four domains, I would have tied them to purpose, because you can. Because at the end of the day, for everybody, it does start with this deep self-reflection and understanding yourself. When you think about purpose, and let's use an example. If you're working with a founder, you're an investor and you're working with a founder of an organization, how do you either assess or take them through a purpose discovery process? Like what are the things that you guys look at when you're going through that process?
I think even the conversation, the question of, have you been through that, is a great activator. And then having that dialogue about, well, how did you come up with that? And I'll give you a small story. I met this amazing entrepreneur, female entrepreneur, very successful. And she just started her third company. It was in stadium security surveillance technology. She had cameras all over, and it looked like something like the Matrix. And I said, this is amazing. What's your purpose? And she said, well, my purpose is actually to serve underprivileged women in Africa. I said, wow, that's amazing. I was like, how does that align with this company? And she couldn't connect the two. She's like, well, it really doesn't, besides maybe providing some resource. And she was such a phenomenal entrepreneur and leader and change maker and thinker doer that my only recommendation to her was find a CEO to take that company on and do that. But don't spend another minute without going after your purpose, because you will change. You will make so much dramatic change in the world by going after, given who you are, given your strengths and your abilities. So that's how we start, which is your purpose aligned with the meaningful work you're doing? Even if you're really good at running video conferences or video surveillance, is it really aligned? And if it's not, spend the time, take the time to go figure out work that's going to be meaningful for that.
Yeah, got it. So obviously starting with the question, what is your purpose? And then if somebody has it, asking how they got there. And then if it sounds like that is truly authentic to them, how well is it aligned actually to what it is that this business is doing and that they're spending probably a vast majority of their time and energy on. So not dissimilar to us, and we'll unpack that a little bit later. But the other thing I like about if you had one area of focus in terms of people that you interact with, communities that you build, businesses you invest in, it comes down to this thinker doer. Well, not mindset, but trait, I suppose, or characteristic that people have. How did you land on thinker doer? Maybe how did you become a thinker doer? If that's a bit of a different way of looking at it, and what is it about that you feel that's the thing to invest in?
Yeah. So I'm going to answer that. Let me answer one more thing, which is you kind of asked it last time. It's like, what if they don't have it, or how do you not just evaluate it, but how do you walk somebody through that? So I think it's important to let me launch into the thinker doer side, which is if someone falls into that 18%, like, hey, I'm working through this, we do have a mastermind group. And so we walk through people. We have a framework and a kind of, not a curriculum, but basically a language around coming up with things and understanding what that is. We have a partnership with a company called Value Mentors, which really help you discover your true values, not just your prescribed or what you think are your values. And then the values are actually the foundation. They're the first principles of your purpose anyway, right? So we have these methodologies to kind of get into. But really, I feel like part of our job is to inspire, activate, and enable people, these thinker doers, to really unleash, right? And to figure out themselves. On the other side of this, the thinker doer side is how do you become one? Thinking is actually a really interesting perspective because in meditation, right, the whole point is not to overthink. And so our English words are a little bit messed up. But let me give you the background. The idea of thinker doers is somebody who thinks deeply or uses their tools to challenge these problems deeply. Not just to take on face value the either conventional wisdom or what they were taught in middle school or in high school or in college. As we've seen, even in black holes in the past 2 months, like everything we know about them is different now, right? So it's going to be different than what we were taught. Are you a deep explorer? Are you curious? And so that's the thinking side. And the doer is, I don't want you just to be a philosopher. I want you to be able to get in the weeds and execute. Are you an executor? Can you figure that out? Whether that's through delegation, or it's because you're a great software developer, or you're a great artist, or you're a great special forces operator, or you're a great athlete, but are you in the doing side of it? Whatever that doing is, and have you figured that out? And so I think that's a really important part of, again, knowing yourselves. Like, are you willing to go challenge, and are you willing to understand and take on, an entrepreneur, if you will, what it is that you're great at?
Yeah, because it's not that necessarily it's easy to come up with a great idea, but a great idea is just a great idea unless you get other people to actually convene around it and help you move it forward. And whether it's you that are implementing it or as you said, you've got other people to implement it, what's the point of having the idea if you actually don't do anything with it? And certainly there's no point investing in an idea if there isn't a pathway to be able to implement it and bring it to life, or to at least to test it, right? So I get that, and I appreciate you going into the headlines of the process. When you talk about values, and you say you're probably starting with values as being one of the core foundational components of understanding what your purpose is, and I would agree with that. I think we look at values as part of the discovery process, along with just generally along with things you believe in and care about and enjoy. But then once you've got the purpose, then we talk about principles as being the vehicle that brings them to life, and we define principles as being the values in action. Right, essentially behaviors, how you show up in the world and how you want to hold yourself accountable to how you interact with other people. And that's what brings the purpose to life in terms of how you interact. The focus is what you're doing day to day to make it happen. And then you have some ambitions that lead towards whatever the impact is you're looking to drive towards. Because purpose on its own is like an idea, only powerful if you put it into action. So with that as a kind of a thread,
Mark, can I ask you a question?
Sorry. Yeah, please. Yeah.
Yeah. So share with us your purpose?
my personal purpose is to create opportunities that inspire people to go forward as the ultimate version of themselves. So a slightly longer way of saying something pretty similar to yours, but there's three pieces to it for me, right? So first piece is I love creating stuff, but being a doer as well. Like I love creating stuff, but ultimately I want it to do something, and I want it to do something that impacts other people. So there's a creating component to it. There's a connecting piece to it, which is connecting people to resources. That's either to other people, to know how, to our programs, like to whatever it is. And then there's an advanced side of it, which is advancing people forward. So for me, what sums up what brings out the best in me and the best impact I can have in the world, which would be the two things that we really look at for purpose, being your best and driving some impact, are creating things where I can bring people together, give them an opportunity to learn something that actually enables them to advance forward, to be the ultimate version of themselves. So that's my personal purpose, and that's what I've essentially kind of brought as an extension of me through Purpose Fused. But Purpose Fused purpose is to use purpose to unlock people's potential. So that's a little bit more concise than what my personal one is, but I'm able to live my personal one through that vehicle. So thanks for asking.
It's great.
I get to talk about that a lot with people, obviously, but I'm actually interested to flip that back around, to using a couple of examples that you might have of entrepreneurs or businesses that you've invested in that you feel had a very clearly defined purpose from the beginning, and were really able to bring it to life. Just for people's information, I think, because what we're still finding in certain sectors is there's a perception of purpose still being a bit of a nice to have, probably because people are thinking it a little bit still from a branding perspective, and we need to be showing that we're doing some good. And it's actually, we say purpose is about people. It's all inside out. It has to come from inside out, reflect the individuals and the collective sort of shared purpose within the organization, and that is authentic, and that's what's going to drive some impact. So what are a couple of good examples of that might sort of provide some good context for other people when they're thinking about purpose within the context of the business?
Great. Well, there's two that come to mind right away, and I'm sure there'll be more that pop up, but because they all have been, it's been kind of a requirement. The first one I'll talk about is Trevor Whitman. He's the founder and CEO of Onyx Sports. And Onyx is, when you look at their site, they're one of the top brands in the MMA space for protective gear. And his purpose in life is to protect the athlete. And he's been in kind of combat sports his entire life. He was a boxer growing up as a young 16-year-old, got into coaching, and he's now been multiple times the coach of the year. He's got a fight coming up at the UFC where this is the first time ever. He only has, I think, 3 fighters. And all 3 fighters are fighting back-to-back in the ring in the main card in UFC. Never happened before. And It's all because of his purpose. And it's his ability to say, this is what I'm focused on. It's about, and he calls it, it's not how you've been born, it's how you get honed. It's like honing the athlete. And his whole promise to them with Onyx is, we've got your back. And so all of their science and all their technology and all their manufacturing is about truly figuring out what's the best way to protect an athlete when they're training, when they're actually in a combat. But most of the injuries in combat sports are all in training. And so that's a great example. And if you ever meet Trevor, if you watch him, I think it's November 5th or something like that. If you watch him on that night, he'll be the coach with a big smile on his face. So he's not intimidating. He's the kindest soul, but he's the most intelligent coach out there, and just an amazing human. And so he's somebody like that, is we love backing people because they're so clear on it. Did he have all the business skills? No. Did he have had he sold 6 companies before? No. Was he very clear about what he could do, his strengths? Did he think deeply about the problem set in his industry? Did he actually then create solutions that were going to address those problems 100%? And so that's a good example. Another example is Krissa Watry. Krissa is the founder and CEO of Dynepic. And Dynapic is it's a basically, without getting too much into it, think of it as a training and marketplace for VR and AR. So think of, she just won a major, I can't go into the details, but a major contract with the Air Force, because their problem is, hey, we have to train all these amazing people on these really hard situations. On the flip side, we have all these content creators that can create new technologies, exponential technologies around VR or AR, which is augmented reality, or other types of mixed reality. The problem is that I can't give all my people access to all that content and then protect their information and their privacy and kind of create this really interesting piece. And her purpose is about that connection. It's about basically creating, this elevating, the human consciousness through training and distribution of content. And so all of a sudden you see her just, winning contract over the top big, tech firms, because again, she has this dedicated focus, and it's really around, putting the oak on her shoulder saying, here's what we're doing. So those are two examples of people that we've invested in. We truly believe in the entrepreneurs. And again, were they the number one, Silicon Valley startup guys? No. Are they the people we back? Yes.
I love that. And what I love specifically about it is that it's individuals that have brought their own really core purpose to life in a business setting, but truly by saying, well, look, I know there's something in this. This can have impact. This makes a difference. This is a need, and I understand what the need is because these are the problems. And then they've found enough. And obviously they've got enough specialized knowledge in a particular area as well to move it forward. But then they've found a community of other people like yourselves to really fill in some gaps and try to fuel it and take it to the next level. And I guess if you were to look at the other side of that, like what are some examples of, if you can think of any, of a founder that actually had a pretty inspirational purpose, but for whatever reason it didn't come to fruition or wasn't quite successful from a business perspective? If you've got any examples on that, or if not, just generally, what would you think it is that gets in the way or prevents you from being able to translate that purpose into something that can be commercially successful and therefore scale that impact that you want to have?
Yeah, so Mark, I would say two things. I gave you one example of an entrepreneur, I won't name her, who had a purpose that was not aligned with their business. And the business was successful, but I felt like I didn't feel like she was fully fulfilled. Like her life was not quite what it could have been because she wasn't really day in, day out, spending her energy and her amazing, power of execution in that purpose. And so that's an example. And there's others. I've had plenty of people come to me with an idea like, hey, this thing's going to make a ton of money. And when it's not aligned with their purpose, I question whether or not that entrepreneur will be able to have the staying power when it gets tough. Because every endeavor gets tough, right? The value of despair is real. And it's different for every person, but it gets tough in here, in the arena, as they say. And if it doesn't fully align, what's going to be the fuel and the motivation to keep you going and to survive and to will through it? So that's a kind of a key thing. I think there's probably other examples, but I think that's where I would give you those two.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we always talk about, if you can look at anything in context of three A's, right? The first one is authenticity. So actually, is this thing that I'm looking at over here truly authentic to actually what my purpose is? Firstly, the purpose has got to be authentic to you. So therefore, to your values, you've got to have gone through a proper process. But does it just pass that gut test, right? Secondly, is that it's got to be aligned. So if you were to draw a line from what my purpose looks like into my kind of vision or my dream in the future, and from this other thing, are they on a parallel course, or are they both pointing in the same direction? And then the third part is that, does this thing actually enable me to advance my purpose forward, so that I can dedicate a little bit of time to it every day? Because if not, again, without those three things, you kind of end up just spinning your wheels. And it might be that you have an amazing philanthropic purpose, And that's something that you're really truly dedicated to, which therefore doesn't need to align 100% to this bright, shiny commercial object over here. But what is important is that by doing that, you're allowed to do this, or you enable yourself to do this, and ideally you can connect the dots so that they're better aligned. So that we look at it in a similar way.
Yeah, so let me dig into that a little bit. So I think one of the people who find a purpose, like mine, unleash the greatness of people around me. Sometimes we find people then to be impatient. Like, okay, therefore I have to find it. Like, what's that? Unleash the greatness of people around me.com. Right? That's not a business. That's a purpose.
Right.
Yeah. Right. That's we call that the infinite game. Like, that's never going to end. Doesn't matter what I work on. And when I found that purpose, I looked at it. I said, "Oh, I could be a teacher. I could be a coach. I could start another company. I could stay home and be a dad. I mean, there's so many things I can do. This is awesome." What came up was to build Black Lab. That's a unique concept that fit my purpose. And then I can build a business, and I can build a lifestyle, and I can build, even a fortune if I want to around that. But I find sometimes people get a little bit impatient saying, "Hey, I think I know my purpose, but I can't figure out the business." And that's okay. Like, give it time. It took me 9 months to figure out that connection, right?
Yes.
Like, let that germinate. Be curious about what that could be. Talk to people about it, and who knows what's going to show up.
Yeah, and I think I love the infinite game as a quote around that, because that's exactly one of the things we say to everybody, is that don't let your purpose statement can be applicable to so many things. It can be somewhat generic. What's important is that it's inspirational, and it's true to you, and it's memorable, and it's relevant, and it just reflects the best version of you in the world, right? So if you fast forward to the end and look back, and you've actually lived that statement, that you'd be proud. Now, how do you want to do it? We'll work out what are all the different things you can do first. Like, what are that? There's loads of things. You don't have to do all of them. That's the point. And to ultimately to bring it to life, you've got to look at it within the context of all the other aspects of your life, and you need to be able to do it in a way that you can still pay the bills and keep the basic kind of foundational needs in place, but that you do enough of it that you can, get to more of the aspirational flow experiences, and really sort of pushing yourself, and ultimately just sort of living your values. So, but the infinite game is a great way of looking at purpose in a vacuum, because there's no point kind of having it in a vacuum, because nothing happens to it, right? We're speeding through here, so I've got a couple of other questions. But one thing you mentioned about this sort of, it gets tough, right? And I've always been interested in the relationship between purpose and resilience. You mentioned about, it provides a bit of fuel and a bit of motivation. Is that really what purpose's role is in helping people overcome challenges and get through hardships, or is there more to it, do you think?
I mean, I'll steal from Viktor Frankl here on this one, right? Once you understand your purpose, it provides both direction, but also, that fuel. It doesn't matter the hardship. You believe what you're doing. You're going to do it, whatever it takes to get through it. You don't get distracted. It's like the swimmer, right? Like, he doesn't just go around in circles. He's going towards whatever buoy he set up. And this story of Viktor Frankl in the concentration camp, and he was going to write this book about, understanding man's search for meaning and their purpose. And it doesn't matter even if your family gets killed. And it's like the book of Job. I mean, this has been written so many times that it is the thing, right? And it doesn't matter what dialect or story you want to listen to. This is the story of us persevering during hardship. I truly believe.
Yeah, no, and that a great example, and ultimately the man's search for meaning is meaning, and it's finding meaning, and it's that meaning that can provide you with the direction, and therefore the hope, and ultimately just the resilience to not give up and to get there, which still has to be based upon your current reality, which in his situation was pretty dire, right? But as long as it's grounded in reality and it's true to you and it's something you believe in, then you don't give up on it. So that's I agree. Similar kind of take on that. Well, look, let's let's dig in a little bit more to your purpose then, because it's the infinite game of unleashing the greatness in people around you. So how do you look at that? And if you were to look at it in the way that we look at it, which is to break it down into kind of three pieces, and we've already touched on this, but I think it'd be helpful for people to sort of just to hear is, if you were to break it down about, what is it you're passionate about, which we would define as, what you believe in, what you care about, what you really enjoy doing. What's the impact you want to have in the world, which we talk about on 3 dimensions: me, we, and world. So the impact on yourself, the impact on those you surround yourself with, which is all the people around you. And therefore there's a knock-on effect. So what's the broader effect in the world? And then how have you actually brought that to life? Again, I think we know the answers, but if you were to summarize your purpose in those 3 words, either words or a sentence for each: passion, impact, and application, how would you break it down?
So no one's ever really asked me to decode what unleash greatness means. So this will be interesting. I like it. I'm giving away the secret sauce, but it's okay.
I don't know that we can all replicate it though, so I think you're right.
No, it's good. So I use the words unleash greatness because for me it's very inspirational, right? Those are the motivational words. What it really means is it's my passion about up-leveling consciousness in the people around me. And this is again, it's an infinite game. Like where I was 10 years ago compared to where I was 6 years ago, I'm a completely different person. I say this to my wife all the time. Like, we've been together now we'll be together for, gosh, I shouldn't say this online, but 30 years in next March, right? And what's amazing about that, I know, right? It's from dating, right? But what's amazing is we are completely different people than we were 30 years ago. I mean, it couldn't be more different. And if you're not really curious about that and understanding that that's going to evolve, even your kids, right? From 2 to 6 to 12 to 8, mine are 18 and 20 now. They're such different people. And so if you're not really curious about learning about that new relationship. So for me, this idea, this passion of watching people evolve and grow is really, I think that's really at the core of what unleashing greatness is like up-leveling consciousness. When you talk about impact in those 3 things, the me side is one of my core values is know thyself. And ever since I understood that, it's been a roller coaster because it's like a rabbit hole. Like you go in and you're like, oh yeah, I get it now. And then you're like, oh wait, I really didn't get it at all. And you keep on going and learning. So learning and growth and, so now I'm a biohacker, thanks to my, tumor. I'm an avid reader of, philosophy. I hated philosophy in college. Like I couldn't even deal with it. Right. I experiment, I do ceremonies, I do plant medicine. All these things are brand new to understanding more and more about me. And then when it comes to the we, that's our Black Lab ecosystem. This is this venture ecosystem we have. It's all the Thinker Doers come together, whether you're an artist or entrepreneur, investor, special forces operator, athlete, some kind of, institutional researcher. So all these people coming together as a community to really help each other to kind of, again, just do that, evolve and grow. And so I learn a ton from my community. And then everything I learn and everything I practice on myself, I offer back out to the community. And it's all about up-leveling that consciousness.
Yeah.
And then the world part is that what we believe is that when we get 1 million Thinker Doers as part of our community, it's going to help the entire species. The companies we want to invest in, one of the key elements is we call it HPI, which is the human potential impact. So instead of a KPI, like a financial impact, we want to know how many humans will it impact. And so all the investments, we want to say, hey, can it impact 1 billion people in the next 5 years? And if the answer is yes, that's a really good starting point. So we believe that these folks, these Thinker Doers, focused on really hard problems with kind of a language and a growth mindset and a learning mindset about helping themselves and then our group, then obviously humanity. We think that's the impact and the application that we want to apply.
Yeah, love it. Oh, given that you said you hadn't been asked to break it down before, I love that it provides so much color to it, right? Because as you said, the statement in and of itself is inspirational. How different people would go about it and how different people would define it obviously would be different. And there's not a ton of people on earth that would be bold enough to have that as a statement, right? But when you actually unpack it in that way, it gives it even more meaning. And the fact that you can have a sentence on can it impact 1 billion people as a starting point for looking at something really just shows, right, the type of impact that as a community that you guys can have and aspire to have, and I'm sure we'll have. And I obviously look forward to being part of that and getting more involved myself as a Colorado implant now. So look, with all that said, JP, look, really, I really appreciate your intentionality with everything that you're doing. It was great to hear, some of the background and context of that just even in the last 10 years, and how you've been able to really just continue to learn and grow and apply and deep dive into things that enable you to give back to so many other people that have this think and do mindset and get stuff done. So I'm sure this is going to be really insightful and inspirational to everyone that watches it. And just want to thank you again for your time.
Yeah, of course, Mark. Thanks for having me. And, again, please do join, be part of the community. We have a really open door policy. Come take a look at our site or come to one of our events. And, love to, have you and meet any of your listeners.
Brilliant. Thanks so much.